The Humiliated Father II, 10th of May 1961, Part 1 of 4. Please excuse me if, in this space open to everyone, I ask those who belong to the same group of friends to pause for an instant to think of a man who was their friend, my friend, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, who delighted us for a moment last Wednesday, the evening of my last seminar, whose death we learnt of a few hours later. It was a great shock. Maurice Merleau-Ponty followed his own path, pursued his own research, which was not the same as mine. We had started from different points, we had different perspectives, and I would even say that it's with completely opposite perspectives that we found ourselves, one and the other, making a stance in our teaching. He had always wanted and desired to teach, whereas I can say that it is very much despite myself that I occupy this podium. I can also say that we haven't had time, because of this deadly fatality, to bring our formulas and statements closer together. His place in relation to what I am teaching you would have been in harmony. And I think after this week, in which, believe you me, the effect of this profound grief that I have felt about it has made me question myself about how I can fill this place left behind, and in such a way that I can call myself into question in front of myself, at least as it seemed to me that from him, by his response, his attitude, by his friendly propositions, each time he came here, I take up this help, this comfort that I think we had in common in relation to teaching, this idea that pushes as far away as possible from any infatuation with precepts and, in short, all pedantry. So excuse me if what I meant to say to you today, and in which I was counting on finishing this detour, which I told you the reasons for last time, this detour by way of Claudel's contemporary tragedy. So excuse me if today I don't push things further than I am able to push them. Indeed, forgive me, because no doubt I have had to divert myself from the preparations that I usually devote to you. We left things last time at the end of the hostage, and with the emergence of an image, the image of Cine de Coufontaine saying no. That said, this no had the very place to which a tragedy, that I will provisionally call a Christian tragedy, pushes its heroine. We have to take stock of each of these words. I have spoken to you enough about tragedy for you to know that for Hegel, when he locates it in the phenomenology of spirit, it is conceivable that the words Christian tragedy are linked in some way to reconciliation, to Versöhnung, which connotes redemption, being in Hegel's eyes something that, at the same time, resolves the conflict of tragedy, or the fundamental impasse of Greek tragedy, and, as a consequence, does not allow it to be established in its own form. At the most, it sets up a level that can be called the Divine Comedy, that in which the threads are, in the final analysis, all held by the one, in whom every tie, albeit beyond our knowledge base, is reconciled. No doubt, experience goes against this knot-like attachment in which, through some bias, the Hegelian perspective no doubt collapses, since what is also reborn, after this particular human voice, is that of Kierkegaard, who brings its contradiction, and the testament of Shakespeare's Hamlet, which 2 years ago we spent a lot of time on, is there to show us something else, another dimension that subsists, that at the very least does not allow us to say that the Christian era brought the dimension of tragedy to a close. Hamlet, is it a tragedy? Definitely. I believe I showed you this. Is it a Christian tragedy? It is precisely here that Hegel's line of questioning is relevant, for in truth, as you know, in this Hamlet, not the slightest trace of reconciliation appears. Despite the presence on the horizon of the dogma of the Christian faith, there is no moment in Hamlet in which there is a recourse to the mediation of any kind of redemption. In Hamlet, the sacrifice of the son remains pure tragedy. Nevertheless, we cannot absolutely eliminate this, which is no less present in this strange tragedy, what I called just now the dimension of the dogma of the Christian faith, i.e., that the Father, the ghost, the one who, from beyond death, reveals to the Son both that he has been killed and how and by whom, is a damned Father. Strange, as I've said of this tragedy, of which I have definitely not been able, in front of you, to use up all the resources in my commentary. Strange hence this added contradiction, on which we did not spend time, which is that it is left in no doubt that it is from the flames of hell, from eternal damnation, that this Father testifies. Nevertheless, it is as a sceptic, as a pupil of Montaigne, we have been told, that this Hamlet asks himself to be or not to be, to sleep perchance to dream. This beyond life, does it deliver us from this cursed life, from this ocean of humiliation and servitude that is life? And in the same way, we cannot not draw the scale that establishes this range that from ancient tragedy to the Claudelian drama could be formulated thus. At the level of Oedipus, the father already killed, without the hero even knowing, he did not know, not just that it was at his hands that the father had met his death, but even that he was his father. And yet the base, the weave of tragedy indicates that he is already it, at the level of Hamlet, this father, damned. What can that, for us, beyond the fantasy of eternal damnation, mean? Isn't this damnation linked for us to the emergence of this, that here the father begins to know? He definitely does not know the whole workings, but he knows more about it than one might think. He knows, in any case, who has killed him and how he died. I left this mystery in my commentary open for you, a gap left by Shakespeare by the dramaturgy of what this orchard signifies, in which death surprised him. The text tells us, in the blossoms of his sin, and this other enigma, that it is via the ear that the poison is poured into him. What enters via the ear if not an utterance? And what is behind this utterance, this mystery of lust? Is it that, responding to the strange injustice of the maternal jouissance, doesn't some hubris respond here that betrays the form that, in Hamlet's eyes, the father ideal has? This father in relation to which, in Hamlet, it says nothing other than that he was what we could call the chivalrous ideal of courtly love. This man who carpeted where the queen walked with flowers, this man who removed from her face, the text tells us, the slightest puff of wind. Might not beteem the winds of heaven visit her face too roughly? Such is this strange dimension in which is held, and uniquely for Hamlet, the lofty dignity, the source of indignation always bubbling away in Hamlet's heart. For one, nowhere is he evoked as a king, nowhere is he discussed as a figure of authority. The father is there as a sort of man ideal, and this deserves no less to be left open in the form of a question, as for each of these stages we can only hope to get the truth from a subsequent revelation. And equally, in the light of something that it seems to us analysts, natural to project across history, like the question of the father repeated from age to age, stop a moment to observe to what extent, before psychoanalysis existed, it was never, at its heart, to do with anything but this function of the father being in question. Even the personage of the ancient father, as we have called it in our imagery, is a kingly personage. The personage of the divine father poses, from biblical texts, enough questions for a whole research project. From what point did the God of the Jews become a father? From what point in history? From what point in prophetic formulation? All these things stir up thematic, historic, exegetic questions that are so profound that, without even posing them, they are evoked anyway. It is simply a question of noting that the theme of the problem of the father, of Freud's "What is the father?", has to be really narrowed down for it to have taken on for us the obscure form of a knot, not only mortal but murderous, in which for us it is established in the form of the Oedipus complex. God, Creator, Divine Providence, this is not what it is about for us in the question of the Father, even if all these harmonics constitute its base. If they constitute its base, what we have posed is the question of knowing whether this base, from what we have articulated, is going to have some light shed on it as a result. Is it not opportune, necessary henceforth, whatever our tastes, our preferences may be, and whatever this work of Claudel's represents for each of us, are we not obliged to ask what the theme of the father in a tragedy can be, when it is a tragedy that has appeared in an epoch when, as a result of Freud, the question of the father has profoundly changed? And equally, we cannot think that it is by accident that in the Claudelian tragedy it is all about the father. The last part of the trilogy is called The Humiliated Father, completing our series. Earlier the father already killed, the father in the damnation of his death, and now the humiliated father. What does that mean? What does Claudel mean by the term humiliated father? And to begin with, the question can be asked, within the Claudelian thematic, this humiliated father, where is he? Find the humiliated father, as it says on the postcard riddles. Find the thief or else the policeman. Who is the humiliated father? Is it the Pope, insofar as, still pious though he is, there are two in the play over the course of the trilogy, the first fugitive, even less than fugitive, abducted, to the point that there also, from the ambiguity carried within the terms of the titles, we could ask if it is not him who is the hostage. And since the pious at the end of the third play, the pious who gives us his confession, eminently touching scene and well done for exploiting a certain correctly speaking Christian and Catholic theme, the one who is the servant of the servants, the one who makes himself smaller than the little people, in short, this scene that I will read to you from the humiliated father, in which he confesses to an unimportant monk, who is himself nothing but a geese or pig or whatever herder, and of course who carries within himself a ministry of the most profound and of the most simple wisdom. Let's not dwell too much on these beautiful images, in which it seems that Claudel rather sacrifices to those who are exploited, in a way that goes much further than a whole English dandyism, in which Catholicity and Catholicism are for the English authors, from a certain date that goes back nearly 200 years now, the ultimate distinction. The problem is definitely elsewhere. The humiliated father, I do not think it is this Pope. There are plenty of other fatherly noises. It is not just about that for the duration of these three plays. And just as well, the father that one sees most of, the father the calibre of whom is confined to a kind of obscenity, the father the calibre of whom is, properly speaking, brazen, the father in relation to whom we can hardly manage not to notice some echoes of the gorilla-like form in which right on the horizon Freud's myth makes it appear to us. The father here is precisely Toussaint Turelleux, in relation to whom the play, and the murder of whom is going to become not only the pivot but the object, correctly speaking, of the central theme of Hard Bread.